241 I agree. Ever since Yan Yin overheard that conversation and found out that Yu Yan's family was wealthier than his, he had been feeling insecure. Yu Yan's current behavior made Yan Yin feel that his guess was right. As he watched Yu Yan leave, Yan Yin felt very anxious. After all, the two of them had just gotten together and their relationship wasn't solid yet. If Yu Yan's parents were fast enough, Yu Yan might be transferred back to the city very soon. He definitely wouldn't be able to follow them. Returning to the city required money and connections. If they weren't related, who would help a stranger? Yan Yin decided to speed things up and take their relationship to the next level. Recently, Yu Yan had been ostracized by Su Ling. However, because she would send food to some female intellectuals from time to time, there were still some greedy people who were willing to hang out with her. There were some people who were neutral and didn't hang out with Su Ling, but Yu Yan felt that they were slow-witted and only had working in mind, so she disdained to play with them. Among the female intellectuals, Yu Yan was the most well-off. However, because she had to save money to visit Duan Mei, she had been short on money recently. Those people were secretly saying that Yu Yan was stingy, which angered Yu Yan so much that she had been staying in the dormitory apart from working. On their day off, Yan Yin took the initiative to invite Yu Yan to watch a movie. Yu Yan was bored at that time, so when she heard that there was no need for her to pay, she immediately agreed happily. At this time, movie theaters still used projections. The projector projected the movie onto a large white cloth. Even with such simple equipment, the movie theater was still fully packed. The movie theater only had a screening room that could accommodate about 300 people. It was played twice a day, once in the morning and once in the afternoon. The second floor, which was for projectors and discs, was built in the back half of the theater. After Yan Yin bought the tickets, he specifically brought Yu Yan to buy melon seeds. When they were halfway to the cinema from the supply company, Yan Yin said that he wanted to buy soda, so the two of them returned to the supply company. After 2 trips, when they arrived at the cinema, only the back seats were left. Yu Yan was a little unhappy and she frowned at Yan Yin as she complained, "It's all your fault. Only the back seats are left." At this time, there were still no fixed seats, so it was first come, first served. Yan Yin smiled good-naturedly and said, "All right, it's all my fault. I was just worried that you would be thirsty after eating melon seeds." When Yu Yan heard Yan Yin say that he had bought it for her, she felt a little embarrassed. When she turned around and saw Yan Yin smile, she suddenly felt her face heat up, so she turned around and looked straight ahead. When Yan Yin saw Yu Yan's reaction, a scheming look flashed across his eyes. The lights in the cinema were suddenly turned off, and the room was plunged into darkness. A few seconds later, light began to refract from the curtain in front of them. The movie had begun. Yan Yin's mind wasn't on the movie at all. After more than 10 minutes the movie started playing, Yan Yin saw Yu Yan reach into the bag containing the melon seeds while watching the movie, so he reached over to take the melon seeds as well. Yu Yan was watching with relish and didn't notice Yan Yin's actions at all. When their hands touched, she was so startled that she immediately withdrew her hand and turned to look at Yan Yin. Yan Yin hurriedly apologized in a low voice. "I'm sorry." Yu Yan shook her head. When she saw Yan Yin take the melon seeds and pull his hand away, she reached into the paper bag again. Recalling the feeling when the other party's calloused palm touched the back of her hand just now, Yu Yan felt the heat on her face return. Yu Yan suppressed the strange feeling in her heart and looked up at the screen. However, Yan Yin didn't give her time to calm down. He looked at her hand, which was on her lap, and grabbed it. Yu Yan was stunned by Yan Yin's sudden action. When she came back to her senses, her heart raced. She quickly looked at the people around her and heaved a sigh of relief when she realized that no one was paying attention to her. Then, Yu Yan exerted force to pull her hand out, but Yan Yin pressed Yu Yan's hand on his leg firmly. Yu Yan looked up at Yan Yin and said anxiously in a low voice, "You're crazy. There are people beside us. It'll be over if we're discovered." Yan Yin replied, "Then promise me that we can hold hands when there's no one around." When Yu Yan heard this, she was angry and embarrassed. She exerted force again. When she realized that she couldn't pull her hand out, she could only compromise. "I agree." Yan Yin revealed a smug smile in the darkness and let go of Yu Yan's hand. Subscribe and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. 242 I will only marry you. Yu Yan hurriedly retracted her hand, but her attention could no longer return to the screen. Her thoughts drifted to the first night they interacted intimately, and then to the scene where he forced her to hold hands. The two of them had gotten a little too close to each other just now. He smelled quite good, and he gave off the faint fragrance of soap. As expected, she had to find someone from the city. Rural people worked in the fields all day long and were so dirty. They were unworthy of her. At the thought of this, Yu Yan secretly glanced at Yan Yin from the corner of her eye. Yan Yan was good-looking to begin with. In the dark cinema, the screen emitted a weak light. Under this hazy feeling and the heart-fluttering sensation that had just been aroused, Yu Yan suddenly felt that the embarrassing touch just now was a little romantic. Yu Yan suddenly thought of what her cousin had said. If someone could make her heart race, it meant that she liked him. Although Yu Yan wasn't sure if she liked Yan Yan or not, she knew that being with Yan Yan was definitely better than being with that bumpkin her adoptive parents had found for her. Her adoptive brother wasn't a good person either. Initially, she thought that although she wasn't his biological sister, he had been quite good to her since she was young. However, her adoptive brother didn't think of introducing her to the children of high-ranking officials in the army. He even introduced her to someone whose family was in the countryside. She heard that that person even had twin siblings who were 6 years old. She didn't know what the man's parents were thinking. Their son was already 19 years old, but they still wanted to give birth to more children. In the future, when the younger ones grew up, the two old fellows would be so old that they wouldn't be able to work anymore. In the end, the betrothal gifts and dowry would fall into the hands of the eldest son and daughter-in-law. Yu Yan felt that her adoptive parents treated her as a fool. Fortunately, her hunger strike was effective and forced them to give up on this idea. Otherwise, she would definitely turn the courtyard upside down and embarrass them. She didn't plan to take care of her future husband's siblings. At the thought of this, Yu Yan began to feel indignant about how Yu Bing could get Yan Yan, who had been carefully chosen by her parents. However, when she thought of Yan Yan's various advances on her, Yu Yan attributed all of this to Yan Yan's affection for or even infatuation with her, so she felt smug. She had charmed Yu Bing's fiance into being loyal to her. Wasn't this direct proof that she was more outstanding than Yu Bing? During the remaining hour of the movie, Yu Yan's imagination was running wild, while Yan Yan was coming up with his subsequent plan. It was only noon after the movie, so Yan Yan brought Yu Yan to the state-owned restaurant for noodles. Then, they went to the park to swim in the lake. When they returned to the village on the ox cart, it was already 5 o'clock. After interacting with her for some time, Yan Yan had discovered that Yu Yan was a simple-minded and vain person who was vulnerable to flattery. Therefore, he easily won Yu Yan over and she was all smiles for the entire afternoon. Yu Yan was even more satisfied with Yan Yan, so it could be said that both sides felt that they had achieved their goal. However, when Yan Yan calculated that the expenditure for today was as high as 2 yuan, he immediately felt rueful. He could only comfort himself that one had to spend money to make money. After dinner, the two of them gathered in an inconspicuous corner under the dormitory building. Yan Yan looked at Yu Yan affectionately as he said, "Yu Yan, I don't want to hide my relationship with you like this. I want everyone to know that you're my girlfriend." As Yu Yan looked at Yan Yan's serious and affectionate confession, she felt extremely satisfied. However, she couldn't let Yan Yan have his way so quickly. Things that were obtained too easily often weren't cherished. She had to continue to keep Yan Yan hanging to let him know that she wasn't a woman who could be obtained easily. However, Yu Yan naturally couldn't show it on her face. She pretended to be troubled as she said, "Let's wait a little longer. We haven't been together for long. If everyone finds out that you like someone else one day, how can I survive here?" Yan Yan immediately expressed his loyalty. "How can that be? I've only liked you in my life. I won't marry anyone but you." When Yu Yan heard Yan Yan's confession, she wasn't fooled by his words. Instead, she thought of Yu Bing. "Psst, are you lying to me? You even helped Yu Bing carry water previously. If you didn't like her, how could you help her?" Subscribe and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. 243 treating her as a sister. Yan Yan was stunned for a moment when he heard this, but he quickly found an excuse. "Everyone knows that we got engaged when we were young. I've always treated her as my sister, so I wanted to take care of her more. But later on, I got to know you. At that time, I was also very conflicted. On one hand, she's my responsibility, and on the other hand, you're the person I like. I tried to let go of you, but I really couldn't control my heart. At that time, I was really conflicted, so I didn't go to her house anymore." The outcome of the matter didn't change, but the content had been changed by Yan Yan. Yu Yan was very satisfied with what he said. However, Yu Yan still had another question. "But don't your parents want you two to be together? Does who you like even matter?" Factors like his parents and his family concerned the possibility of long-term development. This question made Yan Yan tense up. He had to answer flawlessly. Only by making Yu Yan believe that he would marry her could he have a share of her family's resources. Yan Yan lowered his eyes and pretended to be helpless, but his mind was racing. A moment later, he said in a low voice, "Yu Yan, an arranged marriage is arranged. I really don't want to spend the rest of my life like this. I only want to be with the person I like." Then, he looked up at Yu Yan seriously. So, I told my mother to help me cancel the engagement. Otherwise, even if Yu Bing and I were together, we would despise each other. My mother had already agreed, so I couldn't control myself that night. Otherwise, I definitely wouldn't have let you get involved in the relationship between me and Yu Bing and ruin your reputation. This time, not only did Yan Yin explain everything perfectly, but he also explained why he had molested her that night. When Yu Yin heard this, she was overjoyed. As expected, Yu Bing was nothing compared to her. Yu Yin didn't expect Yan Yin to be so loyal to her. Before she had any feelings for him, he already had deep feelings for her. At the thought of this, she finally agreed to publicize their relationship. While Yu Yin and Yan Yin were getting intimate with each other, Yu Bing was focused on her career. Yu Bing planned to continue getting orders from other cities. In addition, Xiaosheng had gotten in touch with Zhangli now. The black market that Zhangli was in charge of was in the city, so the demand was very high. To distribute the goods in the black market, Xiaosheng could only forge documents for the food factory to legitimize this illicit dealing. After Yu Bing and Wu Jing discussed it, they planned to introduce a production line. Feng Kai called his family and checked the price. The machine Yu Bing wanted cost about 5,000 to 6,000 yuan. However, in the long term, this could increase the productivity and competitiveness of their food factory. However, if they wanted to introduce a production line, they had to look for the county leader to approve it first. This experimental unit was personally managed by Mr. Bai, so they had to go to his office. This was one of the restrictions of the planned economy. It was rare for Zhangli to get up early, but when he came to the village and found out that Yu Bing had gone to the county city to do business, he could only return unhappily. At this moment, Yu Bing was waiting in the county government's building anxiously. It wasn't easy for her to wait until Mr. Bai, who had gone out to inspect the base, returned, but she was turned down. Yu Bing asked in confusion, "Mr. Bai, why?" As Mr. Bai looked at the young lady who had made the food factory's business boom in less than half a year, he said earnestly, "Yu Bing, your development is too fast. Being too anxious about expansion is not a good thing. Young people can't be impatient. You have to play it safe." Yu Bing looked dejected. At the end of the day, Mr. Bai didn't believe that she still had so many orders. "Mr. Bai, I'm not in a hurry to expand, but if this continues, there won't be enough manpower. Moreover, no matter how fast a person is, he can't be as fast as a machine. Our current manpower is just right for now, but if we want to accept a few more orders, with our shortage of manpower, we definitely won't be able to accept them. Do we have to turn down business?" Mr. Bai was exasperated. He had seen how difficult it was to convince Yu Bing, but the food factory was still in debt. If he signed the contract and introduced the production line to expand, but didn't get orders afterwards, the capital chain would be broken and they wouldn't be able to pay the debt. The people in charge of the other departments would probably come to his office door every day to demand an explanation. Even if he wanted to help the food factory operated by the He Mountain Brigade, he had to consider the other departments. Seeing that Yu Bing was unwilling to let him off, Mr. Bai could only explain the possible consequences. "You still owe them money, so I can't sign this. Subscribe and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much." 244 Unexpected Surprise. When Yu Bing saw Mr. Bai's troubled expression, she understood the other party's difficulties. If she didn't show him something convincing, it would be a little difficult to get approval for the production line. Hence, Yu Bing returned to the factory first and looked for Wen Qin to settle all the debts. After Wen Qin worked for a while, she was already proficient in many things. As soon as Yu Bing asked for the data, she took out the account book and reported, "Because our orders for the past 2 months have stabilized, the factory has always had orders for production. Therefore, the progress of our repayment with the various supply units, machinery plants, and banks is far faster than that of the previous agreement. Currently, the farm is in debt." As she listened to Wen Qin report her debt, Yu Bing felt a headache coming on. She still owed a total of 22,098 yuan, and the amount they currently had was only 10,820 yuan. Of which, 6,000 yuan was to be used to buy machines. The remaining 1,000 yuan was used for the daily cash flow in the factory, which meant that the actual amount available was only 3,820 yuan. As Yu Bing looked at the specific amount of debt on the paper, she thought for a long time and said, "We'll pay off all the debts first. There are still more than 2 years to go before we have to pay off the bank's 4,000 yuan. Let's put it aside for now. We'll also put aside the 588 yuan payment for the city's machinery factory. The fertilizer factory, pesticide factory, and farm don't owe much. We'll pay off the total debt for them, which is 2,562 yuan. Wen Qin, add all the arrears for the raw materials supply unit that will be settled at the end of every month and see how much they cost in total." After Wen Qin calculated it, she came up with a number quickly. 3,267 yuan. Yu Bing frowned. After deducting the 2,562 yuan that needs to be returned, there's still 1,258 yuan left. Even if the rest can be deducted from the debt that can be delayed for the time being, the remaining debt can't be repaid no matter what. When Wen-Chin saw Yu Bing's troubled expression, she was very helpless as well. Although she was born into a family of businessmen, she didn't know much about business at all. If she was asked to do accounting, she could handle it in minutes, but in terms of coming up with ideas, there was really nothing she could do. When Xiaoxing entered the office, he saw Yu Bing's troubled expression and teased with a smile. It's rare to see Miss Yu being stumped. Yu Bing glared at Xiaoxing. Stop gloating. Xiaoxing knew Yu Bing's plan, so he asked directly, why did Mr. Bai reject you? Tell me. Perhaps I can give you a good idea. After hearing Yu Bing's recount, Xiaoxing raised his hand and knocked Yu Bing's forehead. Although it didn't hurt, Yu Bing still touched her forehead and hit Xiaoxing's arm fiercely. It hurts. Wen-Chin chuckled. She realized that Yu Bing's usual maturity and calmness would disappear occasionally when she encountered Xiaoxing. Every time this happened, she felt that she shouldn't be in the room. Yu Bing's little strength was like a mere tickle for Xiaoxing, who smiled and said, aren't you quite smart? Why can't you think of it? Aren't the chickens, ducks, fish, and fruit trees in our village potential sources of money? Yu Bing clapped her hands and came to a realization. That's right. How could I have forgotten? Mr. Bai got me all confused. Moreover, we've already paid off a portion of the money. Logically speaking, our current assets are more than our debt. Even if the food factory really closes down, we can completely pay off our debts after we sell our assets. Yu Bing borrowed Xiaoxing's bicycle and rushed to the county city. Zhang Li missed her again. Looking at the locked office, Zhang Li shook his head helplessly. She's working way too hard. Yu Bing tried to convince Mr. Bai again. As she looked at the signature and seal on the note that approved the purchase of the production equipment, Yu Bing's desire to go all out ignited. 2 days later, everything in Zhang Li's order was manufactured. On the 7th day, 3,000 bottles of spicy products were completed on time. Zhang Chao, with another underling, was in charge of the transportation. Yu Bing planned to follow them to S City to look at the production line. Although City H was the capital of the provincial city, it was still a little inferior to S City, which had trade with foreign countries and more advanced manufacturing technologies. Xiaoxing planned to go to the big hospital in S City to get a consultation for Xiaoli. This time, he would go out in the name of purchasing machinery and equipment with Yu Bing. Zhang Li had originally planned to take the train, but after knowing that Yu Bing was also going to S City, he decisively chose to take the truck with them. Subscribe and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. 245 Tribulation. There were 5 spaces in the front compartment of the large truck, which was just enough to sit in. When Zhang Li saw Xiaoxing, who was sitting between him and Yu Bing, he felt dejected. However, he had no choice. After all, this seating was arranged by Yu Bing. The journey took 3 days, and sitting all day was very tiring. The next day, Zhang Li regretted it. He could have had a good sleeper for a 2-day train journey, but instead, he insisted on suffering with them. The worst part was that he couldn't sit next to Yu Bing. Because the place was under reconstruction, Zhang Chao took a detour. At 8 in the evening, before the car entered the county city, the few of them were already hungry. Fortunately, Yu Bing had prepared biscuits and candy, so everyone ate them to fill their stomachs. The road was already dark and the only source of light was the 4 headlights in front of the tractor. As Yu Bing looked at the night sky through the window, she suddenly felt uneasy. How much longer will it be until we reach the nearest town? As Zhang Chao sat in the front passenger seat, he looked at the map and estimated, I estimate that it will take at least half an hour. I didn't expect the detour to last 2 to 3 hours. When Xiaoxing glanced at Yu Bing, he saw her worried look, so he comforted her, don't worry, we have iron rods and knives in the truck when we travel long distances. Yu Bing was speechless. Yu Bing was very puzzled. What did this have to do with weapons? This was clearly a safety problem. At this time, everyone was poor, so there would be people who took the risk to hijack trucks. The supplies on the truck were valuable. Even if they couldn't sell them, if they encountered a truck like theirs that stored food, they could eat the food. Moreover, these people wouldn't attack anywhere near their village. Instead, they usually went to roads that were more than 50 kilometers away from their own village, for fear that the police would investigate after the driver called the police. Therefore, trucks that had been hijacked basically wouldn't be able to retrieve the goods. They could only blame their bad luck. Oh no, there are trees and nails blocking the way. Zhang Chao sounded a little tense. The few people in the back seat leaned forward and looked out of the car window. They realized that a tree trunk that was 30 to 40 centimeters thick blocked the entire road. There were even rows of large iron nails placed in front of the tree trunk. This was blatant robbery. At this time in her previous life, Yu Bing had gone to the countryside for labor reform, so she never had this sort of experience at all. She had only heard about it from others. Now that she saw it, she finally realized how brazen these people were. Zhang Chao had no choice but to stop the truck. Xiaoxing took out an iron rod from the compartment under the back seat. Other than Yu Bing, he gave one to everyone else. Then, he turned to Yu Bing and said, "Lock the door later." Yu Bing nodded repeatedly. She knew that if she couldn't help, at least she shouldn't be a burden. After Xiaoxing and the other three got out of the truck, Yu Bing hurriedly locked the door. At this moment, the people hiding in the grass behind the tree appeared. More than 20 people were holding long knives and iron rods. From their temperament, one could tell that they were experienced robbers. They were not poor people who just wanted to steal food to fill their stomachs. Xiaoxing realized that he had encountered a tough nut to crack. The man in the lead had a fierce expression. "We don't want to fight, so you better not resist. Or else, you'll get injured and lose your money. Open the trunk." A few people had already circled to the back of the truck and smashed the trunk with iron rods. Zhang Li was a little tyrant in the military courtyard, so he had never been bullied like this before. He mocked with a sneer, "You're quite fierce. Let me tell you, even if Satan comes, I won't be afraid." While Zhang Li was talking, Xiaoxing quickly looked at the position where their opponents were standing and realized that those people had surrounded them and their truck, but they seemed very relaxed. He guessed that the people they had stopped previously had probably compromised very quickly. Seeing that Zhang Li and the other party were still arguing, Xiaoxing quickly told Zhang Chao and the others how to fight later. Zhang Chao had followed Xiaoxing for a few months and had developed a tacit understanding with him in terms of fighting, so he understood Xiaoxing's instructions very quickly. When Zhang Li saw the other party's stubborn attitude, he warned them one last time, "Don't say that I didn't remind you later. These are F***King military goods. If you guys dare to steal them, I will find you guys even if you hide underground." The man in the lead was already impatient and asked with laughter, "Buddies, are you guys afraid? These are military goods." The lackeys beside him also teased, "We're not afraid. We haven't robbed the army's goods before, so we can give it a try." The man in the lead laughed smugly. "Did you think we'd be frightened? Why don't you just say that these products are for the country's leaders? Buddies, don't waste time anymore. Attack. Subscribe and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much." 246 Chili water. The man in the lead stood still while the other lackeys rushed forward. Zhang Chao and his lackeys were in charge of resisting both sides. Zhang Li was from a military family, so his martial arts skills were outstanding. He and Xiaoxing mainly attacked in the front. At this moment, Yu Bing heard a sound in the front truck. She looked around and realized that it was the sound of knives and iron locks knocking on the door of the trunk. When she realized that these people had division of labor, she looked at her companions, who were fighting in front of her, anxiously. This batch of goods had yet to be transported to the designated delivery place in S City, so if it was taken away, the factory would bear the losses of this batch of goods. The loss would be more than 4,000 yuan. However, the knocking sounds that followed unnerved Yu Bing, who could no longer sit still. She bent down and found an iron rod under the seat, then took out a handheld sprayer from her backpack. Before she set off, Yu Bing had filled the inside with chili water, but she didn't expect it to really come in handy. Yu Bing quickly jumped out of the truck and squatted on the ground. When she saw 2 feet at the back of the car from the bottom of the truck, she felt more confident. When she walked to the back of the car, she saw that the 2 men were still trying their best to smash the lock. Yu Bing immediately went forward to stop them. "Stop!" The 2 men didn't expect a girl to suddenly appear. When they saw that Yu Bing had one hand behind her back and was holding an iron rod in the other, they couldn't help but laugh loudly and say disdainfully, "Little girl, that iron rod is not for girls. I advise you to stay at the side instead of getting in the way. Otherwise, you will suffer." When Yu Bing heard this, she took a step forward and challenged the other party. "Then give it a try. Let's see who suffers." When the 2 men heard this, impatience appeared on their faces. This lock was about to be smashed, so wasn't this a waste of their time? A man with a scar on his forehead frowned and said, "Seems like you want to do this the hard way. Big Head, continue smashing the lock. I'll deal with her." Yu Bing continued to provoke the other party, "Don't. The 2 of you should attack together. My time is more precious than yours." The scar-faced man laughed lewdly and turned to the man called Big Head. "I originally wanted to be lenient today and leave after taking the goods. Big Head, you should enjoy the little girl who sent herself to you." Big Head also stopped what he was doing and sized Yu Bing up as he said frivolously, "All right, while they fight in the front, let's deal with this brat first. Didn't she say that the 2 of us should attack together? Looks like she's experienced." The 2 of them exchanged looks. They assumed that a little girl couldn't do anything to them, so they walked towards Yu Bing. Yu Bing stood there very calmly. She waited until the two of them were 2 meters in front of her before suddenly raising the sprayer behind her. With the hand holding the iron rod, she quickly pushed the push lever, and chilly water sprayed into the man's eyes. Ah! It hurts! What the hell is this? Help! The 2 men covered their eyes and didn't dare to open them at all. They could only shout loudly in hopes of attracting the attention of the people in front. However, the group of people in front of the truck was engaged in a heated fight, so they didn't notice the commotion behind them. Xiaoxing withstood most of the enemy's attacks all alone, while the others supported him. When the man in the lead saw that the situation had reversed in just a few minutes, he understood that he had encountered a tough opponent today. Seeing that more and more of his subordinates had been beaten to the ground, he raised his saber and joined the battle. The man saw Zhang Li and remembered that the other 3 had been very protective of him during the fight, so he planned to make an example of Zhang Li. If something happened to an important person, they would definitely try their best to save him. At that time, they might even let them take their things and go. Thinking of this, the man slashed at Zhang Li's back with all his might. When Xiaoxing saw the man's bulging muscles, he knew that if he didn't block the knife, Zhang Li would most likely be severely injured. Xiaoxing didn't know how powerful Zhang Li's background was, but to be able to occupy half of the black market in a place like S-City, his family's background was definitely not to be underestimated. Out of instinctive reaction, Xiaoxing extended his iron rod and blocked the man's long saber. Bang! A part of the hollow iron rod caved in, causing Xiaoxing's hand to go numb. Subscribe and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. 247 Fighting too much. After Zhang Li finished dealing with the 2 lackeys, he turned around and saw this scene. He widened his eyes and said angrily, "How dare you try to kill me? If I don't skin you guys alive tonight, I won't live up to my reputation as a little tyrant." Thinking about how he had almost lost half his life in this remote village, Zhang Li was even more furious. If those people in the courtyard found out, how could he maintain his dignity? At this moment, there were still 4 to 5 people who could fight. When Xiaoxing saw that Zhang Li could free his hands to deal with the man, he took the time to look back at the front of the truck, but he didn't see Yu Bing. Then, he realized that the door showed signs of opening and immediately turned around to run towards the front truck. When Xiaoxing saw that the truck was empty, his heart suddenly skipped a beat and his mind went blank. At this moment, he heard a man shout from behind the car, so he ran to the back of the car. When he arrived, he saw Yu Bing raise the iron rod and hit the back of the man's head. Yu Bing gave each of them a blow. Her actions were swift and ruthless. Of course, she didn't kill them and only knocked them out. When Yu Bing turned around, she saw Xiaoxing's gloomy expression. Thinking that he was worried about the goods, she hurriedly went forward and said with a proud smile, "Don't worry, I kept my eye on the goods." When Xiaoxing saw Yu Bing's smug expression, he felt even angrier. "Who let you come down?" Yu Bing was so frightened by Xiaoxing's angry voice that she trembled and stared at Xiaoxing in a daze. A few seconds later, she explained in a low voice, they were picking the lock at the back. When Xiaoxing heard this, he was even angrier. Yu Bing knew that there were 2 men, but she still dared to run to the back. Is your life more important or the goods more important? Yu Bing originally felt guilty, but when she heard this, she puffed up her chest and said to Xiaoxing, "They're both important. These goods cost 4,180 yuan. When Xiaoxing saw how righteous Yu Bing was despite risking her own life, he was so angry that he didn't know how to communicate with her. He wished he could teach her a lesson, but in the end, he only grabbed Yu Bing's arm and dragged her back to the truck. His expression was serious as he warned, "No matter what happens, you're not allowed to come down." After Xiaoxing finished speaking, he closed the door with a bang. As Yu Bing looked at Xiaoxing's departing figure through the car window, she muttered indignantly, "So what if you can fight? I can outsmart them." When Xiaoxing returned, Zhang Li and the others had already beaten the remaining few to the ground. Zhang Li was still brooding over the possibility of losing face, so he had to teach them a lesson. "Xiaoxing, we have to call the police. Since they dared to threaten me, we have to wipe them out." Zhang Chao also echoed, "Brother Zhang is right. I wonder which brat slapped my face. If my wife doesn't recognize me after I go back, I have to make them pay the price." Xiaoxing frowned as he looked at the people on the ground. "Take down the ropes in our truck and tie them all up. Then, we'll go to town to call the police. The police will deal with the aftermath." They did as he said. Zhang Li was the most enthusiastic about this matter. When he returned, he had to tell his brother that he had done a good deed for the people during this business trip. After ensuring that they couldn't escape, Xiaoxing and the others moved the thing blocking the way. After a smooth journey, they arrived in town in less than half an hour. Zhang Li brought Zhang Chao to report to the police, while Xiaoxing drove to the guest house and took out the recommendation letter from the factory to check in. After all this trouble, the few of them finally had dinner at the guest house. Zhang Chao told the few of them who didn't go what happened after they called the police. It turned out that those people were all repeat offenders. After the police found out about the situation, they said that they would be sentenced to prison terms ranging from 5 to 10 years. Then, Zhang Chao began to praise Xiaoxing again. Those people were quite good at fighting. If it weren't for boss, who could fight 10 people all alone, how could we have defended this batch of goods? I can only say that they were destined to encounter this calamity. Their demise was predestined. Zhang Li was unhappy when he heard this. After all, even if he couldn't fight 10 people alone, he could fight 6 or 7. However, when he thought of the attack that Xiaoxing had blocked for him, although he didn't want to admit it, he had to admit that Xiaoxing was indeed good at fighting. Brother, your martial arts techniques were quite impressive. They seemed like military moves. Xiaoxing didn't explain further. He only said calmly, I gained experience after fighting often. When Zhang Li heard this, he felt that it made sense. Well said. Battle experience increases our strength. Subscribe and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. 248 Industrial Stamp. Yu Bing was eating as she listened to their conversation. Although she felt that she had done nothing wrong, out of intuition, she felt that it was better for her to speak less tonight when facing Xiaoxing. The next morning, everyone continued on their way. The journey was very smooth and they reached S City at around 5 in the afternoon. Zhang Li had already gotten someone to prepare the rest of the money and deliver the goods at the same time. The few of them quickly unloaded the goods into Zhang Li's warehouse. When they arrived at Zhang Li's territory, Zhang Li planned to show off in front of Yu Bing. The nightlife in S City is very lively. We can go eat first. I heard that a new movie has been released recently and has raving reviews. After seeing the movie, we can go to the mall. The mall will only close at 10 p.m. Yu Bing rejected him with a smile. Mr. Zhang, you haven't been home for so many days, so you should go home and have a good meal with your family first. The few of us will eat something and rest. After Zhang Li's invitation was rejected, he could only go home first. He comforted himself that it wasn't easy for him to bring the goods back, so it was time to go back and show off. Zhang Chao stayed with his subordinates for the night. He had to drive the truck back tomorrow morning. After all, there was still a pile of goods waiting to be shipped, so he prepared to rest early after dinner. After Yu Bing finished eating, she planned to go to the department store to buy a watch. However, after rummaging through her bag, she realized that she had only brought her watch stamp and had left her industrial stamp at home. In the planning economy, other than having the corresponding receipts, they also had to save up on industrial stamps. If Yu Bing wanted to buy a watch, not only did she have to prepare money, but she also had to prepare a watch stamp and an industrial stamp, or else she couldn't buy anything. These two types of stamps were very rare. Most of them would only be given to people who worked in factories. Yu Bing had exchanged them with Wang Yun. Wang Yun didn't accept money, so Yu Bing could only give her more than 10 pounds of jerky in return. If she bought them, a watch stamp and an industrial stamp would cost dozens of yuan. Yu Bing thought that Xiaoxing might have stamps with him, but when she thought about how Xiaoxing had not taken the initiative to talk to her since last night, she felt angry. After she thought for a moment, she finally knocked on the door. After Xiaoxing opened the door, Yu Bing ignored him and skipped past him. She looked at Zhang Chao and asked, Zhang Chao, did you bring industrial stamps? One will do. When Zhang Chao heard his name, he walked to the door. Yu Bing, I only brought food stamps and meat stamps. With that, he looked at Xiaoxing. Boss, I remember that you always bring stamps when you go out. Do you have them? Xiaoxing glanced at Yu Bing and replied, yes. When Yu Bing saw Xiaoxing's cold expression, she hesitated for a moment before turning around and returning to her room. Zhang Chao was baffled and asked, Boss, did you guys quarrel? Xiaoxing felt very dejected. Without replying, he turned around and entered the room. Seeing this, Zhang Chao felt fortunate that his wife told him everything, unlike these two, who were both so secretive and uncommunicative. As Xiaoxing lay on the bed, he sulked. Last night, she had disregarded her own safety, but she thought that he was in the wrong? His anger hadn't even subsided yet, but she was angry now. Moreover, what did she mean just now? She didn't ask him, but asked Zhang Chao instead when she knew that he had stamps. After tossing and turning on the bed for a few minutes, Xiaoxing chose to compromise. After he sat up, he took out an industrial stamp from his pocket and left the room. When Yu Bing heard the knock on the door, she stood up and opened it. Xiaoxing handed over the industrial stamp and said, It's already dark outside, so I'll accompany you to the department store. Xiaoxing had already compromised, so Yu Bing naturally wouldn't put on an attitude anymore. She took the stamp and said, I'll return it to you when I get back. I'll get my bag first. After Yu Bing took her bag from the room, she left with Xiaoxing. In S City, there were still cable cars from before the founding of the country. Although it was already past 7 in the evening, there were still many bicycles on the streets. There were also some small cars. Compared to other cities, S City was much more prosperous. The guest house was very close to the Yellow Port River. There were boats of all sizes parked on the river, both domestic and overseas boats. Yu Bing and Xiaoxing bought a map at the guest house. Then, the two of them followed the map and got on the bus that headed to the department store. Visit and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. 249 in the Dead Center. The department store had 5 floors. At the entrance of the first floor, a sign showed the main products of each floor. The first floor was filled with various electrical appliances and industrial products. The second, third, and fourth floors were filled with clothes and shoes. The fifth floor was filled with toys and various miscellaneous items. The department store was very lively at night. Most of the people came here to shop after dinner. As soon as she entered, Yu Bing went to the counter to look at watches. S City's watches were very famous. Most of the watches on the counter were domestic. The only imported watches were all from well-known brands. After a few decades, they had become luxury goods, so they weren't cheap now. In the end, Yu Bing hesitated over 3 watches. 2 of them were from a famous domestic brand from S City, and the other one was from a foreign brand. How much are these watches? The salesperson played with her nails as she glanced at them and said the Plum brand one costs 120 yuan, while the Peony brand one costs 180 yuan, and the WM brand one costs 280 yuan. The salesperson at the counter watched the two of them look at the watches for more than 10 minutes. With the watches on the counter, she couldn't go anywhere, so she was a little impatient. I'll put the watches back inside the counter first. You guys can take your time choosing until closing time. When Yu Bing saw the salesperson's attitude, she felt angry, but she endured it. At this time, there were no private enterprises and all enterprises were state-owned, so it was impossible for these salespeople to feel the need to provide good service. This was the advantage of having a monopoly. Even if Yu Bing changed to another department store, she would receive the same service. When Xiaoxing saw that Yu Bing couldn't make up her mind, he pointed at the Peony brand and said, "Choose this one." The Peony brand watch had a round watch shell that was small and exquisite. The dial was simple and elegant. The 3-dimensional scale and needle were also golden in color, but there were black edges. It looked very sophisticated and easy to read. The silver-white chain strap was low-key but tasteful. Then, Xiaoxing analyzed it for Yu Bing. Although the style of Plum brand watch is classic, it's more suitable for women over the age of 30. The WM brand watch's design is very creative and unique. But if it appears in the village, I guarantee that you will immediately become the latest topic of conversation in the village. When Yu Bing thought of the gossipy villagers that rivaled the paparazzi of the modern era, she burst out laughing. She looked at the salesperson, who had already run to chat with her colleagues, and shouted, "I want this Peony brand watch." Only then did the salesperson slowly walk over and take out the watch from the counter again. Then, she picked up the receipt beside her and started writing. 180 yuan, 1 watch stamp, 1 industrial stamp each. After Yu Bing handed over the money and stamps, she picked up her watch happily. After the two of them left the counter, Yu Bing said to Xiaoxing, "If jobs are no longer so secure in the future, I think the first person to be fired will be that salesperson from just now." Xiaoxing smiled and said, "How is that possible? How can a state-owned enterprise go bankrupt? It's not like collective industries or private companies overseas, which can go bankrupt at the drop of a hat." Indeed, it was impossible for people of this era to imagine the monumental economic reform that would happen a few years later. Yu Bing couldn't reveal too much, so she could only whisper with a mysterious expression, "Young man, you're still young. How can there be anything in this world that remains the same forever?" After Xiaoxing thought about it with a frown, he felt that Yu Bing's words did make sense. Then, he looked at Yu Bing and said curiously, "You always have so many outlandish ideas in your mind. Moreover, you're very bold." When Xiaoxing said she was bold, other than referring to the fact that Yu Bing, a girl, dared to get involved in the black market, he was also referring to the fact that she seemed to have an inexplicable optimism about the future. However, this optimism was unrelated to anything they had experienced now, such as buying books to prepare for the college entrance examination, or Yu Bing's inadvertent revelation that she was optimistic about the future economic situation. Of course, if Yu Bing had not been reborn, she probably would have had the same conservative view of the future as Xiaoxing. However, she knew the future. If she didn't do anything about it, she would feel that she had let down the opportunity the heavens had given her. Because she knew that Xiaoxing was trustworthy, sometimes, Yu Bing couldn't help but let things slip. When she heard Xiaoxing's question, she only smiled and gave an ambiguous answer. Fullness for the bold, famine for the timid. I'm in the dead center and barely get by. Logo. This is the end of part 1, and subscribe and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. 250 buying toys. The two of them chatted softly as they walked. Most of this era's clothes were in black, white, gray, blue, or green, but because of S-City's advantage as a port city, it had many foreign brands and its people were much more stylish. However, Yu Bing only took a cursory glance. She had seen many beautiful clothes in her previous life, so she could resist the temptation of these styles. Moreover, she worked all day, so it wasn't suitable for her to wear glamorous clothes and dresses. When the two of them arrived at the children's clothing area, Yu Bing saw a beautiful blue and white navy-style dress. Her eyes lit up and she immediately rushed over. This is so beautiful. Yu Bing turned to look at Xiaoxing. Xiaoli will definitely look good in this. Xiaoxing glanced at the dress. After a few seconds, he said slowly, after she finishes the surgery, I'll bring her here to choose personally. Yu Bing nodded and said with a smile, she'll definitely be very happy. I'll pay for it. You're not allowed to snatch my credit. Yu Bing thought of her vision regarding marriage in her previous life and said, I've always thought that if I had a daughter, I would definitely dress her up every day like a little princess. If Xiaoli underwent surgery, Yu Bing would also take some time to come over. The two little fellows of the Xiao family were so grateful and sensible that her heart ached for them. Yu Bing only chatted with Xiaoli occasionally, but Xiaolin and Xiaoli were so grateful that they plucked fruits and sent other things to her in return. When they watered their own vegetable field and pulled weeds, they even did the same for her. As long as they could help, they would do it directly and wouldn't let her or Jiang Chun refuse. To be honest, Yu Bing already treated them as her siblings. When Xiaoxing heard Yu Bing's words, he looked conflicted. Do you plan to get married soon? Yu Bing paused for a moment before saying, I don't plan to get married. It's quite nice to be alone. Now, it was Xiaoxing's turn to be stunned. Why? Yu Bing couldn't say that she was traumatized because she had been screwed over too badly in her previous life, so she could only say perfunctorily, after you marry someone, you have to serve your in-laws and take care of your siblings. You also have to prevent your spouse from cheating. It's too tiring. Xiaoxing was speechless. Xiaoxing couldn't help but think about his family's situation. He could skip the in-law segment. He had siblings, but he would take care of them. Moreover, his brother and sister were quite independent and could take care of themselves. As for cheating, he was definitely not an irresponsible person. Once he chose to get married, he would definitely treat her well for the rest of his life. Cheating was impossible for him. The more Xiaoxing thought about it, the further off tangent he went. He suddenly came back to his senses. What was he thinking? His sister's surgery hadn't even been settled yet, so why was he thinking about such nonsense? He removed these thoughts from his mind. The two of them arrived at the 5th floor soon. Yu Bing took a fancy to a toy frog that could jump on a chain and a puppy made of cloth. I want 2 tin frogs and that puppy in dungarees. Yu Bing smiled at Xiaoxing and said, every time I carry the little tiger to your house, Xiaoli looks overjoyed. I might as well buy her a little cloth dog. This toy frog is for Xiaolin. I can already imagine him showing off in the village. Xiaoxing hurriedly stopped her. Don't buy these things for them. They're not cheap. After Yu Bing glared at Xiaoxing, she picked up the toys again. It's not easy for me to come to S-City. What's wrong with me buying some toys for them? They've helped me so much, so I have to thank them. The salesperson was already ready for the payment. Seeing that the two of them were about the same age and seemed very close when they interacted, she guessed that the two of them were in a relationship and preparing to get married. She hurriedly advised, it's normal for future sister-in-laws to buy gifts for their brother-in-laws or sister-in-laws. You guys will be family in the future. Young man, don't be too fussy. As soon as she said this, Yu Bing and Xiaoxing immediately blushed. Yu Bing hurriedly explained, we're friends. We're not in the kind of relationship you're talking about. The salesperson revealed an understanding smile. Young people are all bashful before they get married. All right. I won't say anything more. Yu Bing felt that the misunderstanding was getting worse, so after paying the money and stamps, she grabbed the toys and left in a hurry, for fear that the salesperson would blurt out something inappropriate again. Xiaoxing followed behind Yu Bing with a blush. Along the way, the two of them didn't mention the previous misunderstanding and changed the topic. Subscribe and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much.